She texted me at 6:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, watching the light come through the window the way it does in October. Slow and pale, like it's not sure it wants to be here. I had my reading glasses on. I was looking at nothing in particular. Just sitting the way a man sits when he's earned the right to sit quietly. My phone buzzed on the table. I picked it up. Change of plans. Derek is coming to Thanksgiving instead of you. The kids are more comfortable with him there. You understand, right? I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the table and finished my coffee. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened next. I'm not a man who yells. Never have been. My father used to say that the loudest thing in any room is a man who has nothing real to say. I've carried that with me for 63 years. Through a first marriage that ended quietly. Through raising 2 kids mostly alone after their mother left. Through building a contracting business from a single truck and a tool belt into something that employed 11 people at its peak. I am not a man who yells. But I sat at that table for a long time. Her name was Patricia. We met at a church fundraiser 4 years ago. She was laughing at something her friend said when I walked in, and that laugh, open, unguarded, like she didn't care who heard, that laugh made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. But I was 59 years old, and I thought I was done feeling things like that. She had 2 grandchildren. Marcus, who was 8 at the time, and Lily, who was 6. Her daughter, Renee, was a single mother. Renee lived about 40 minutes away and worked long hours, so Patricia watched the kids often. When Patricia and I got serious, I started showing up too. Reading to Lily on the couch. Helping Marcus with a science project about volcanoes. Taking them both to get ice cream after their Saturday soccer games. I wasn't trying to be their grandfather. I was just being a person who was present. But somewhere along the way, I became Grandpa Ray to those 2 kids. And I want to be honest with you, that meant more to me than I ever said out loud. Patricia and I married 18 months after we met. Small ceremony. Nothing fancy. Her sister came. My son drove down from Cincinnati. We had dinner at a restaurant we liked and danced in the parking lot afterward because we were too old to care what anyone thought. Derek is Patricia's brother. He is 51 years old and has been between jobs, as he calls it, for most of the time I've known him. In the 4 years Patricia and I were together, Derek borrowed money from me, 6 separate times. I know because I kept records. Not out of suspicion. Just because I'm a man who kept records. $11,000 total. He paid back $800 of it. Every time Patricia asked me to help Derek, she had a reason. He needed to cover rent. His car needed a repair. He had a job opportunity, but needed a little bridge money. I said yes every time, not because I believed the reasons, but because she was my wife, and I loved her, and sometimes love means you write the check and don't make a scene. But Derek had also, over those 4 years, developed a habit of being around, at our house on Sundays. At family dinners I was paying for. At the kids' soccer games standing next to Renee, making the children laugh in ways that made me feel like a guest at my own life. I'm not a jealous man. I want to be clear about that. Derek is Patricia's brother, and he loved those grandchildren, and I never begrudged him that. What I noticed, slowly, the way you notice water rising rather than flooding, was that whenever Derek was in the room, I became background. Patricia would turn toward him. The kids would run to him. Conversations I was part of would shift, and I'd find myself standing at the edge of them. I told myself it was family dynamics. I told myself I was overthinking. I told myself that a man who has everything he needs shouldn't spend time counting what he's missing. I told myself a lot of things. 3 weeks before that October morning, Patricia had brought up Thanksgiving. Her daughter Renee was hosting for the first time. It was going to be at Renee's new house, a house I'd helped her find a contractor to renovate, a kitchen I'd helped design, tile I'd personally picked up in my truck when the delivery fell through. Renee and I had a good relationship, I thought. Patricia said it would be a full family dinner. She was excited. She started talking about what to bring, who would sit where, whether Marcus was old enough to sit at the adult table. I sat across from her and thought, this is what I built this life for. And then, 3 weeks later, the text, Derek is coming instead of you. The kids are more comfortable with him there. I picked my phone back up. I didn't call her. I didn't text back. Not right away. I went to my office, a small room off the garage where I keep my files and my father's old drafting table and a coffee maker that only I use. And I sat down and I thought clearly for about 2 hours. This is what I knew. The house we lived in was mine. I'd owned it for 11 years before I met Patricia. My name, my mortgage paid off 6 years ago, my deed. The joint checking account we shared had at that moment $42,000 in it. Of that, I had deposited $38,000. Patricia worked part-time at a florist shop and contributed when she could, and I had never once made her feel bad about the difference. Not once. The Thanksgiving dinner was happening at a house I had spent 7 weekends helping renovate, and I had been uninvited by text message at 6:47 in the morning. I'm going to tell you what I did, and I'm going to tell it to you straight. I called my attorney. He's a man named Gerald who I've used for business contracts for 15 years. I told him I needed to start separation paperwork. He asked if I was sure. I told him I'd been sure for about 90 minutes. He said he'd have something ready by end of week. Then I called my bank. I didn't empty the joint account. I'm not that kind of man. But I moved my $38,000 into a separate account I opened that morning. I left Patricia's contributions untouched. Then I called a real estate agent named Carol who had sold me my previous house and knew mine well. I told her I was thinking about listing and asked what it would move for in today's market. She gave me a number that made me sit back in my chair. I told her to start the paperwork. I want to stop here and tell you something, because I think it matters. I wasn't angry. I thought about that a lot since. A man gets a text like that, excluded from his own family holiday, replaced by the brother-in-law he'd been financially supporting for 4 years. And you'd expect rage. You'd expect him to call and shout or drive somewhere and slam a door. I felt something quieter than anger, closer to clarity. Like when the fog burns off on a cold morning and you can see the tree line again. You didn't realize how long you'd been squinting. Patricia called at noon. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 12:14. I let that go too. Her message said, "Ray, I hope you're not upset. It's just one dinner. Derek makes the kids comfortable in a way that's hard to explain. You know I love you. Call me back." I listened to it once, then set the phone down. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I drove to Renee's house. I knocked on the door. Renee answered, and I could see from her face that she didn't know about the text. She smiled, started to say something about Thanksgiving, and I held up one hand gently. I said, "I just came to tell you in person that I won't be at dinner. And I want you to know that whatever happens between your mother and me has nothing to do with you and the kids. You've been good to me, and I appreciate that." Renee stared at me for a moment. She said, "What do you mean, whatever happens?" I said, "Your mother will explain." I drove home. That evening, Patricia came home, and I was in the kitchen making dinner. I'd made enough for 2, because I'm not the kind of man who makes a point out of portion sizes. And she walked in and stood in the doorway with her coat still on. She said, "Ray, what is going on? Renee called me. She said you came by." I said, "Sit down, dinner's almost ready." She sat. We ate. Halfway through, she said, "Are you going to say something?" I said, "I called Gerald today." She knew who Gerald was. The color changed in her face. She said, "Why?" I said, "Because I've been thinking. And I think we want different things, Patricia. I think you have a family that was built before me and works fine without me. And I think you know that. And I think that text this morning was the first honest thing that's happened between us in a while." She started to say it wasn't like that. I said, "I know you believe that. We didn't raise our voices. We didn't throw things." She cried. And I sat with that, because she had a right to feel what she felt. I didn't tell her I'd already called Carol. I didn't tell her about the bank account, not yet. That night she slept in the guest room, and I lay in bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about my father's old drafting table and the way he used to say, "Son, a man's greatest asset is knowing when a thing is finished." The following week, Carol brought buyers through the house on a Thursday. They made an offer that same evening. I told Patricia on Friday morning over coffee. I told her calmly and clearly. I told her she had enough in the joint account for first and last month, wherever she chose to go. I told her I was not trying to punish her. She said, "Where am I supposed to go?" I said, "I imagine Derek might know of a place." I'm not proud of that one. But I'm human. She moved in with Renee temporarily. Derek, I was told through the family grapevine, had already found a new apartment. Using what money, nobody said out loud. The house closed in 31 days. I moved into a rental near my son in Cincinnati while I figured out the next chapter. What? Small place, good light. A porch I could sit on in the mornings. Now, I want to tell you about Thanksgiving, because here's where this story stops being about a text message and a house and starts being about something else. 3 days before Thanksgiving, I got a call from Renee. She said, "Ray, I need to tell you something." I said, "All right." She said, "The kids have been asking where you are. Marcus especially. He keeps asking why you're not coming to Thanksgiving." I didn't know what to tell him. I was quiet for a moment. She said, "I want you to know. I didn't know about the text. My mother didn't tell me she was going to do that. And Derek, Ray, Derek isn't good with the kids the way you were. He's good at being fun for 20 minutes. You were there. There's a difference and the kids feel it, even if they can't say it." I sat on the porch and listened. She said, "I know this is a lot to ask, but would you come? Not for my mother, for Marcus and Lily. You could come early, before everyone else. Spend some time with them." I thought about Marcus and his volcano project. I thought about Lily asking me once why my hands were rough, and me telling her it was because I'd spent my whole life building things. She'd said, "Like what?" And I'd said, "Houses mostly, but other things too." She'd thought about that and said, "I think that's good." 6 years old, I said to Renee, "I'll come early, 2 hours before, and I'll leave before Derek arrives, not because I'm afraid of him, just because I think that's cleaner." She said, "Thank you, Ray." I showed up that Wednesday before Thanksgiving with a pecan pie I made myself from a recipe my mother left me, and Marcus met me at the door before I'd even knocked. He said, "Grandpa Ray, where have you been?" And I said, "I've been around, buddy, just in a different place for a while." He accepted that the way children accept things, completely, and without needing it to make adult sense. We sat at the kitchen table and he showed me a drawing he'd made of a house, with a truck parked out front that he said was mine, and a figure standing by the truck that he said was me, and I looked at that drawing for a long moment. Lily came downstairs and climbed into my lap without asking, the way she always had, and we sat like that for almost an hour while Renee cooked and the house smelled like butter and something sweet. And the afternoon light came through the window the same way it does at my kitchen table, slow and pale and uncertain. I left before Derek arrived. I drove back to my rental and sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and called my son in Cincinnati, and we talked for an hour about nothing important. His kids, the weather, a project he was working on. After we hung up, I sat for a while longer. I'm 63 years old. I've built houses I've never lived in, and relationships I've had to walk away from, and a life that looks different at this end than I thought it would from the beginning. Wait, that's not a complaint. That's just what a life is. Here's what I know. I know that you can love someone and still recognize when a thing is finished. I know that a quiet decision made at a kitchen table at 7 in the morning can be the bravest thing a man does all year. I know that children remember who showed up, and they remember who left, and those are two different kinds of memory. And I know that a man who has spent his life building things never really stops. He just changes what he's building. The next chapter is mine to write, and I think it's going to be a good one. If this story brought up something in your own life, a moment when you had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity, I'd like to hear about it. Leave it in the comments. I read everyone, and if you know someone who needed to hear a story like this today, share it with them. You never know who's sitting at a kitchen table right now, reading a message, deciding what kind of man they're going to be. This is Voices of Uncle Raymond. Thank you for being here with me.